finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
All right, welcome back to BS Free MD. I am Dr. Tim Hindmarsh with my lovely wife, Dr. May Hindmarsh, and we're here to hopefully strip away the nonsense and get real about medicine and a bunch of other stuff like relationships, faith, family, and hopefully some fun. Today, we have an electrifying episode for you. We're diving into the world of molecular medicine. Yes, with none other than Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Dr. Bryan is a renowned expert in molecular medicine and nitric oxide biochemistry. We are going to figure out why nitric oxide is really important to you, and you may not know much about it, but you need to. With over 18 years of research experience, he has made groundbreaking discoveries that have revolutionized our understanding of cardiovascular health. Dr. Bryan was the first to describe nitrite and nitrate as essential nutrients for optimal cardiovascular function and to demonstrate the endocrine function of nitric oxide. He's published numerous highly cited papers, authored 5 books, and developed functional bioactive natural products aimed at preventing and treating human diseases. His latest book, Functional Nitric Oxide Nutrition, has been highly praised for its clear and comprehensive exploration of nitric oxide's role in health. We are excited to have him on BS Free MD. Welcome to the show, Dr. Bryan.
Good morning, Tim. May, thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Good morning.
You bet. So just start off. How did you get down this, nitric oxide rabbit hole, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, as you guys know, every career is a journey, and certainly mine has been a journey. But, I was introduced to this whole concept of nitric oxide, I guess it was in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was a first-year student at LSU School of Medicine working on a PhD in molecular and cellular physiology. And Lou Ignarro, one of the gentlemen who shared the Nobel Prize, came to the medical school and gave a lecture on really the discovery of nitric oxide, his personal story, his discoveries, which led him to be awarded a Nobel Prize. And, it was a fascinating molecule. Obviously, with the Nobel Prize being awarded, we knew it was extremely important in science and medicine, but there were still so many unanswered questions on the production and the regulation of nitric oxide in the human body. How is it produced? What goes wrong in people that can't produce it? How do they present clinically? And then perhaps most intriguing was because nitric oxide is a gas, nobody had figured out a way to deliver this bioactive gas therapeutically. And so for me, it was exciting. It was a new type of science and signaling, and that's what sparked my interest. But, as going back, years before, after I finished my inorganic chemistry course at University of Texas, I swore to myself I would never deal in nitrogen-based chemistry again because of this reactivity. And here I am 30 years later, and I've spent better part of 25 years trying to understand nitrogen-based chemistry and really nitric oxide production.
So what year was this when this was first kind of, because I remember as we spoke just before we went on the air, this whole concept of there's this super important signaling molecule or however you want to describe it, that's really important in cardiovascular health, vasodilation, health of endothelium. And we all thought that it was going to be some, dissolved chemical. And here it was a gas. So when was that? Was that like 1995, 1980? When was that?
No, I think the field started with a paper published by Fred Murad, and this is what led him to the Nobel Prize. But he was studying an enzyme called soluble guanylate cyclase. And he published a Proceedings National Academy of Science paper in 1977 showing that nitric oxide gas or any nitrogen-containing species, whether it was nitroglycerin, sodium azide, hydroxylamine, all these would activate an enzyme guanylyl cyclase, which would lead to cyclic GMP accumulation and vasodilation. So that was what started with this whole nitro-vasodilator field. And then in 1980, Bob Furchgott, the third gentleman who shared the Nobel Prize, was the first to describe this endothelium-derived relaxing factor. And that's what you were referring to. There was this molecule that was produced in the lining of the blood vessels that caused vasodilation, increase in blood flow. And so then the race was on. What what is EDRF? What is the signaling molecule that was produced by the lining of the blood vessel? And then 7 years later, in 1987, Lou Ignarro first published and presented that this EDRF, this signaling molecule, was nitric oxide gas. And then that really completed the story. So it dates back, more than 30, almost 40 years now on the first identification of nitric oxide as a signaling molecule. And now, 40 years later, we have a clear understanding on a clear elucidation of the mechanisms of nitric oxide production and nitric oxide signaling.
So, because this is how I used to describe this to patients when I did primary care, which is because I'm a car guy. So the endothelium is sort of the ultimate end organ in our cardiovascular system. And you could liken it to paint on a metal car. So you only have however many molecules thick of paint that protect the car from, rust. Guess what? Oxidation, which is exactly the same thing, believe it or not, that happens in your coronary arteries and all the arteries of your body. If you don't have enough dilatation, if the endothelium is damaged, then you can get plaques that stick in there. And what do? They oxidize. They literally rust and they become unstable. And then they cause clotting, which then gives you a heart attack.
That's right.
So I'm like, if you want to preserve your life, if you want to lower your blood pressure, if you want to increase your cardiovascular health, it's the paint job that matters. It's that endothelium, and nitric oxide is this critical molecule in the health of your paint job, so to speak.
No, so that's a beautiful analogy. I've never heard that, but yeah, it makes perfect sense. So it's the nitric oxide that's produced by the endothelium that actually protects it and maintains its normal function. So when you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, we call that endothelial dysfunction. And as you know, that's the earliest event in the onset and progression of vascular disease, because once you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, you get oxidative stress, you get overproduction of oxygen radicals. You start this whole inflammatory cascade and you start the immune dysfunction. And those are the hallmarks of every single chronic disease. It's oxidative stress, inflammation, and immune dysfunction. And if you can mitigate or prevent the onset and progression of those three things, you can prevent the onset and progression of all chronic disease.
So can you tell us, was your first focus then on cardiovascular vasodilation, or were you focused on just the vascular system in general, cerebral vascular? Where did things sort of take off once the discovery of this?
Well, for me, it was trying to understand the biochemistry, because nitric oxide, once it's produced, it's gone in less than a second. So I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. So my objective was to understand the biochemistry of nitric oxide. Once it's produced, where does it go? What does it become? And what is it? And so how can we track this? Mm-hmm. And so once we had a clear understanding of kind of the reaction kinetics of nitric oxide, then we thought, okay, what does this do in a kind of a intact live animal model? So then, we start doing vascular experiments and really looking at the function of the blood vessels and using different animal models of, genetic deletion of the nitric oxide synthase enzyme in the endothelium, characterizing those mice. And then we would actually give mice heart attacks. We would occlude the LAD and basically allow for no flow ischemia for 60 minutes and then reperfuse them for 24 hours. And then start some interventions and see, can we protect the heart from infarct and decrease death from myocardial infarction in these intervention models, where we would do interventions on restoring nitric oxide production. So really my research over the past 25 years has tried to understand, how is nitric oxide produced? Once it's produced, where does it go? What does it become? And what kind of output or what endpoint does that affect? So going from straight biochemistry all the way to physiology and really trying to understand the pathology of vascular disease. And today we have a clear understanding of all those. We know how nitric oxide is produced. We know what goes wrong and what leads to nitric oxide deficiency in patients. We know how to diagnose it. And perhaps most importantly, now we have product technology and drug therapy going through the FDA, to where hopefully in the very near future, we'll have safe and effective drugs so physicians can start utilizing this technology in their patients.
So can we start with, we'll skip the how is it produced biochemical detail lesson for, I think, for a lot of our audience. Like, please, that will be over my
Yeah,
head.
when the door to the biochem lecture hall
Hit you on the ass.
hit me
at
on
end
the
of
ass
yeah,
35 years ago, I was not going back.
But
Yeah, you understand.
how about the next step? Is there a way to sort of summarize what happens in people? What goes wrong so that their body stops producing nitric oxide naturally?
Well, very simply, it's really the Western lifestyle. It's the diet. It's the Western lifestyle. It's the food we eat. It's the things we do. It's the lack of physical activity. It's completely destroying the microbiome, the bacteria that live in and on our body. And so we understand kind of what leads to the rate limiting step in the enzymatic production of nitric oxide. And it goes back to what you said earlier. It's oxidative stress, and it's oxidation of a critical cofactor called tetrahydrobiopterin, or BH4. So when we oxidize that molecule, that leads to NOS uncoupling and insufficient nitric oxide production in the lining of the blood vessels. But, we also understand that there are bacteria that live in and on our body. There's what's called ammonia oxidizing bacteria that live on our skin that oxidize ammonia that we secrete in our sweat to produce nitric oxide. There are nitrate reducing bacteria on the tongue and the oral cavity that basically utilize nitrate that's found in our diet, green leafy vegetables. And then these bacteria metabolize that into nitrite and nitric oxide gas. So when you start to consider everything that leads to nitric oxide deficiency, it's a poor diet, really lack of any real nutrient dense food. It's sedentary lifestyle. It's the chronic use of things like mouthwash, fluoride in your toothpaste that kill the microbiome, that destroy its diversity, leads to nitric oxide depletion. And then there's, drug therapy that completely shuts down nitric oxide production. We have a clear understanding now that proton pump inhibitors and antacids completely shut down nitric oxide production from both pathways. And now we know that people who have been on PPIs for 3 to 5 years have about 40% higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. So there's a clear clinical observation on the clinical consequences of proton pump inhibitor use. The other thing is, antiseptic mouthwash. 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash every day, and not coincidentally, 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And then the other problem, really the main problem, is fluoride. Fluoride's in most toothpaste. It shuts down your thyroid function. It's a neurotoxin, and it's an antiseptic. Completely kills the microbiome. And so we have to get rid of. So I tell people all the time, just stop doing the things that are disrupting nitric oxide production. Get off your ass. You got to move. You got to exercise. Stop using mouthwash. Get rid of fluoride and wean off antacids. And then now, the other thing we're finding is that chronic statin use, getting your cholesterol below 200, may have severe health consequences because we need cholesterol in that membrane to allow cell membrane fluidity and, transmembrane signaling. And if we can't make cholesterol because we're chronically inhibited from statin therapy, then we basically lose that intracellular signaling. We develop metabolic disease, diabetes. These are mitochondrial toxicants now that could predispose people to certain forms of cancer. So we have to understand the mechanism of action of drug therapy, what it's doing. There's always off-target effects of any pharmaceutical agent, and you have to understand that. And so, in you as physicians have to understand what's the risk-benefit of what you're proposing as treatment for your patients. If the risk far outweigh the benefit, then it's a clear answer. If the benefits far outweigh any risk, then there's a clear answer. But I think the challenge for healthcare practitioners is weighing the risk versus reward in their patient care.
That's a really good point because we've been negligent in doing that. I say we, meaning, not just us because we've changed our tune over the years, but the collective in primary care and specialty physicians, it's treating numbers instead of looking at the whole picture. And, I talk to friends, people, patients, and they're like, why is it that seems like physicians in Western medicine, primary care specifically, don't address like the whole person. It's always like one disease focused thing, go back to systems. It's like, we'll focus on the cardiovascular system. And it's like, oh, your BP's elevated, your cholesterol's elevated, throw all this crap pharmaceuticals at it without thinking the impact, like you said, on the effect on the microbiome, all these other systems. So the cure is worse than what you're trying to.
Well, no, because
to treat.
Because the key to making as much money as possible.
Well, physicians, no,
right.
but think about it.
No.
But go back to this.
No, I get it, but
Yeah.
but let's just listen to this. All of the incentives are for a Pavlovian response to a number. So if your cholesterol is over, if your LDL is over 200, knee-jerk reaction statin. If your blood pressure is over a certain number, knee-jerk reaction, blood pressure medicine. That's what it is. And I do urgent care now. So I see everybody else's prescriptions, like what other, and you sit there and you go, okay, one of the clinics I work in is in a fairly elderly community on, Southern Florida. And there's patients on God knows how many medications that are on the Beers list. Well, if you went to most physicians, the Beers list is a list of medications that you should use in extreme caution or never use in patients that are over 65. It's well established. It's been around forever. If you went to most doctors and you said, don't use this medication because it's on the Beers list, they think the Beers list is about what IPA they're going to have after work. Like it's completely ridiculous. It's all knee-jerk response. I see so many. My pet peeve is blood thinners. I swear that in South Florida, you could get Baskin Robbins with sprinkles of Eliquis on it. Like it's so complete. And you sit there and the patient has, all this cardiovascular disease, all this, they have AFib and they have hypertension. So boom, they meet the criteria, they get a blood thinner. But what about the fact that they're 94, they have knee and hip arthritis, and they use a walker? Like they might not have a stroke, but if they fall down, they're just going to ooze their, like there's no gestalt. It just is, rant over.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway.
No, but I taught in medical school for more than a decade when I was a professor of medicine at UT Health Science Center Medical School in Houston. And the problem is, look, it's not the physicians. Most physicians are doing it for the right reason, but it's the system in which they practice and work that's the problem. And I advocated to change the curriculum, to start getting at least put a nutrition course or some type of root cause course in the curriculum. But there's so much pressure to do what you said, and once you make a diagnosis, really you're left with finite responses to how you can treat those in the so-called standard of care. And if you venture outside of that, then obviously you're practicing outside the standard of care, and there's some risks there. But no, I think these are all symptoms that your body telling you that something's wrong, right? There's a reason you have high blood pressure. There's a reason, you may be prone to clots, and it's looking at the function of the platelets. Look at the cellular function of the platelets and what's in your body activating them, what's causing the dysfunction. And same thing with high blood pressure. Now we know that, 50% of the people that are given prescription medications for their blood pressure don't respond with better blood pressure. And because we're finding that it's not a renin-angiotensin issue, so ACE inhibitors, ARBs aren't going to manage your blood pressure. It's really not an issue with calcium, so calcium antagonists aren't going to affect it. It's typically not a fluid imbalance, so diuretics aren't going to lower it. And beta blockers, which I'm still surprised are some physicians using as first-line therapy for high blood pressure, are some of the worst drugs on the market. So what we're finding is the non-responders to standard therapy is because it's a dysbiosis. If you destroy the bacteria in and on our body that are responsible for producing nitric oxide, this vasoactive molecule, then your blood pressure goes up. So then what I tell people is, if you're using mouthwash, get off mouthwash. If you're exposed to fluoride, get fluoride-free toothpaste, remove it from your drinking water and the water in your home. And then remarkably, their blood pressure begins to normalize. So it's focusing on the root cause and really focusing on the microbiome. And let's improve the microbiome. Let's not destroy it. And then the human body responds.
So
I love how everything's coming back. We've done so many interviews, and we have good friendship with Dr. Sabine Hazen, who's a world-renowned expert in gut microbiome dysbiosis, and how everything is, it's kind of like discovering a new, a new thing in the deep sea. It's like, oh my gosh, the microbiome, look at the role that it plays. 10 years ago, we'd think, oh, leaky gut, autoimmune disease, but now it's like involved in every system in the body, and probably is like the major force in our body for our health in general. And so I find this fascinating.
Well,
I was going to just jump in and say back to the mouthwash, because I know everybody's going to be having these questions. So the mouthwash, is that any mouthwash, or is it just with fluoride?
Well, it's really any antiseptic. Anything that's labeled antiseptic has antiseptic properties, obviously. So these are alcohol-based mouthwash, your Scopes, your Listerine. It's the chemical mouthwashes that contain chlorhexidine, which are typically, prescription medications for periodontal disease, gingivitis, chronic halitosis. But it's anything that says antiseptic, because what that means is it's like a broad spectrum antibacterial. It kills the good bacteria, it kills the bad bacteria. And there are consequences to that. And, I tell people all the time, no one in their right mind would take an antibiotic every day for the rest of their life, because today we know that there's severe consequences on overusing antibiotics. You start to develop, antibiotic resistant bugs and strains of bacteria. There's systemic disease, as you mentioned, leaky gut, and destroying the microbiome is a really bad idea. So why on God's green earth would you use an antiseptic mouthwash every day? Because it's doing the same thing. It's destroying the oral microbiome. We don't know what it's doing downstream in the gut GI, but we swallow bacteria all the time, and it recolonizes along the entire GI tract. And to me, this made sense years ago, because once the microbiome project was completed and we had a clear understanding of it, the bacteria that live in and on our body code for 3 million gene products. The human genome is only codes for about 23,000 gene products. And then the bacteria that live in and on our body outnumber our human cells 10 to 1. So this is part of our ecology. This is part of our health. And this is a symbiotic relationship, meaning that these bacteria are doing beneficial things to the human host. And so, there's some bad guys. There's some pathogen, infectious bacteria that we got to, kind of keep at bay. But, throwing an atomic bomb in the mouth and killing everything is not the solution. In fact, we have to do better, because we're finding that we can selectively kill the pathogens while maintaining the diversity of the non-pathogenic commensal bacteria. And that should be the goal.
It's kind of a obviously tough balance, like anything in medicine, because then, there was the big push for a while about periodontal disease is the biggest cause for cardiovascular, heart health. And so if your gums aren't healthy and you've got gingivitis, then it's going to affect your cardiovascular health. Therefore, brush, floss, use mouthwash, kill the bad stuff. But you're right. You don't want to wipe out the healthy bacteria in the process. Right. And then when I think about all this hand sanitizer, even in the medical industrial complex that's on the wall, sanitize your hands with hand sanitizer before and after each patient. I refused, because I don't think it's good for us. And also it affects my skin to the point that I have horrific eczema.
It gets me so frustrated. I just drink it.
So I mean, soap and water, like, why are we afraid just to use soap and water? Get a little bit of, and this hand sanitizer thing, like I said, it's the worst in medical systems. It's everywhere.
Well, the problem is, and I came up with this concept, and I love to spread the word about it, and May's sick of me hearing it, but germ theory has jumped the shark. Like we have reached maximum germ theory. So this whole business, like, everything needs to be cleaner and more sterilized. And it's ridiculous. Like, I see all these patients, and they use dial soap or Hibiclens, or not Hibiclens, that other, what's the green one? And they sterilize their skin, and then they come in with all these skin infections. And I'm like, dude, you can't do that. Like, what you're doing is you're making your skin downtown Detroit. When you get rid of all of the families in downtown Detroit, the gangs move in. That's what happens. So you use dial soap, take zinc, take vitamin C, do this. Let your skin grow its natural happiness back. And we've taken germ theory to this ridiculous end. Most bacteria, most viruses are wonderfully symbiotic and helpful to humans. It's just a few bad ones.
That's right.
Yeah. So I want
I completely agree.
Get back to the sort of nitric oxide thing. I was just thinking a little bit, I've been reading a bunch of different books on longevity. I'm thinking of Peter Attia's book. And he focuses a lot on, the importance on the cardiovascular section of, you're right, the nitric oxide, but the free radicals in our environment that cause that oxidative stress and deplete that, nitrogen. So aside from the diet, exercise, and the I'm going to get rid of my Tom's mouthwash every night that I use now after I put my retainers in. What about other things? Are they that impactful, or are they very minor? I'm thinking of, the other exposures from like light or unhealthy light, radiation, EMF type stuff. Are those just sort of minor things compared to what you've mentioned as the big ones?
Now, look, I think they all contribute, and it's the cumulative effect of all of those. And so, when we look at the three major sources of superoxide and hydroxyl radical production in the human body, it comes from an uncoupled electron transport in the mitochondria. It comes from an enzyme called NADPH oxidase, and then superoxide is actually produced by the enzyme that normally makes nitric oxide. But when this enzyme becomes uncoupled, it makes superoxide instead of nitric oxide. And so if we can just restore the production of nitric oxide, which has clearly been shown that it recouples the electron transport chain of the mitochondria, prevents electron leakage, and shuts down oxidative stress in the mitochondria, it basically downregulates NADPH oxidase, prevents superoxide production there. And if we recouple the NOS enzyme, then we eliminate it there. So simply giving nitric oxide or restoring the production of nitric oxide mitigates the entire oxidative stress that's produced inside the human body. Now, what does that mean from outside exposure? Certainly EMF, 5G radiation, that frequency, in biochemistry and kind of quantum physics, it's all about frequency and the transfer of electrons, right? And so this frequency of 5G and all this EMF radiation disrupts and knocks electrons off and causes free radicals and oxidative stress. And then things like herbicides and pesticides, which basically, they're mitochondrial toxicants, they uncouple the electron transport and they cause oxidative stress. So mechanistically, the poisons that are put on our food and vegetables are causing oxidative stress. And then,
what
we
I was
live in
going
a toxic world.
Oh, sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No,
I was just going to jump in and say, we talk about the Western diet and the crap in their food. Is there anything in particular, if you had to pick selectively of people to get rid of out of their diet, other than, I would say anything, ultra processed?
You mean Cheetos?
Well, I'm thinking seed oils and things like that. What his thoughts are on? Is there anything sort of that's the worst at the top of the list for causing that oxidative stress?
Well, I think the thing we have the most data on that has really the most kind of convincing clinical outcomes on is glyphosate, the Roundup. All the crops, the soil, the corn, most crops today are genetically modified to where they can survive glyphosate, application. And so there's always residue on these vegetables that are GMO and that are sprayed with glyphosate. And so it's doing a lot of things. It's uncoupling the NOS enzyme. It's completely destroying the microbiome, not only in the soil to the crops in which they're sprayed on, but the microbiome inside the body. So glyphosate, if you look at the correlations between its use and continued use in things like thyroid disease, cancer, autism spectrum disorders, every major chronic disease that we're dealing with today has a really nice correlation or an association. It's not causation yet, but certainly an association with the onset progression of most, if not all, diseases. And so if you look at kind of mechanistically how it's doing that, it's shutting down nitric oxide production, causing inflammation, oxidative stress, immune dysfunction, and destroying the microbiome. That seems to be a common denominator of everything we're dealing with.
Okay. Do you live on your own farm and grow your own?
Absolutely. I live on 800 acres out here in the middle of Texas. And so we raise our own beef. We grow our own vegetables. And it's very important. And, I've been very blessed and fortunate to have the resources to do this. But I tell anybody can do this. But with the problem is that, we have to sample our soil. So every year I do soil samples of where my cows are grazing and where our vegetables are grown. And then I see what's in the soil and what's not in the soil. And if it's depleted in certain micronutrient, then I give it back. And I always fertilize my soil because plants need nitrogen, they need potash, they need the phosphorus and all that to assimilate other nutrients into that plant and vegetable. So I always do soil samples, I always fertilize, but I never add herbicides or pesticides to the vegetables. And, as soon as we finish this, I'm going to the garden and we got a lot of vegetables that are ready. But the downside of it is, you have worms, you have, pests on your vegetables that decrease the yield. But you know what? I would much rather deal with that than to deal with toxic chemicals that I'm giving my family and basically compromising the health of my kids and family.
No, it's so true. I've been really mindful about picking organic vegetables. Now that we're in Florida, if you don't eat those things in like 3 days, they're covered in mold, or you're right, you might get a worm in there, but it sure beats the alternative, which is, and we've seen it, in our patients and our family with the glyphosate thing, wrecking the microbiome, causing autoimmune gut dysbiosis. I mean, it's horrible.
But the insanity is so painfully obvious now. I mean, Bill Gates wants to produce lab-grown meat. Okay, so and then they have this lab-grown meat. I read an article about one of the labs or whatever, and they said it actually might use more energy than actual meat. And I'm like, well, no shit, Sherlock. You're building a gigantic factory to produce protein when we have a whole bunch of 2,000-pound factories that walk around. They eat indigestible cellulose. It goes into their 3 stomachs. It becomes super nutritious, amazingly tasting steaks. And then the byproduct is they poop all of this fertilizer back into the soil to regenerate it with this amazing microbiome that cows have, because they have 3 stomachs and they have to have all this bacteria to chew up cellulose. But no, we'll do it better. We'll do it in a lab.
Yeah.
It's nature knows better than we do.
Yeah, I mean,
and they want to make it taste like meat, which is the irony of the whole thing.
But that's exactly it. When you get to the very, very baseline of where this nonsense comes from, it comes from this idea that we can improve creation. Humans are the masters of creation, not the universe, God, whatever. That's what it is, and it's
very dangerous,
completely insane.
Yeah.
No, it's not only insane; it's dangerous. I mean, it's extremely dangerous. I completely agree with everything you said. The cows are the perfect bioreactor to create the perfect food, right? And I've been around cattle my whole life. We've got a couple hundred head of cattle running around out here, and they eat the grass, they poop, they stomp it in the soil, and they basically refertilize. And I can honestly say, in my 50 years of existence, I've never heard one of my cows fart. So this whole notion, they want to stop the cow farting. I'm like, this is new to me, and I've been living on ranches my entire life. I've been around cows.
That's actually a really good point, because you're right. That's like the main thing. It's like they're releasing all this gas, and I'm thinking, if you're eating the right food, you shouldn't be producing all this excess methane. Really, right? It's when you eat the shitty food that you get gassy.
Right.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
No, let's make a make-believe problem that we have to produce make-believe solutions to, and oh, by the way, it makes us billions of dollars. I mean, that's exactly what this is. I mean, it's so simple.
Well, apparently someone tied like a bag onto the back of a cow's butt and measured methane. I don't know how they did it.
Yes.
So how do we get our nitric oxide?
No, I want to ask about so we talked, obviously vasodilation, cardiovascular system, even the brain health is important. Are there effects of nitric oxide on the endocrine system, as we know it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we published in 2007 that nitric oxide is actually a hormone. And so that was really kind of my eureka moment in science. But, the fact that, before that study that we published, nitric oxide was only considered an autocrine or paracrine mediator, meaning that it can only act in a cell in which it was produced or a neighboring cell because of its short half-life.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to your question, even before 2007, when we published that paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, it was known that the cardioprotective benefits of estrogen and testosterone were due to the fact that they stimulated and activated the release of nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessel. And that's what allowed, for the kind of chronic activation and stimulation of nitric oxide by estrogen and testosterone. But when men reach andropause and women reach menopause, then we lose that activation of nitric oxide. And that's when you see the risk of heart attack, stroke, all-cause cardiovascular mortality kind of go through the roof, right? And now if you do hormone replacement therapy and replace estrogen or replace testosterone or even thyroid hormone or any other hormone replacement therapy, unless you recouple the function of the NOS enzyme, you're really not allowing for the cardioprotective benefits of that hormone replacement therapy. So it's a two-way street. So these hormones stimulate and activate nitric oxide production, but the release of hormones from endocrine glands, whether it's gonads or your thyroid gland or any gland, part of that secretory process is instigated by the production of nitric oxide. So if you lose the production of nitric oxide, then you lose regulation of the secretion of all hormones, but then you lose the activation of nitric oxide production by the release of those hormones. So I tell people all the time, and I lecture to a lot of hormone clinics that are doing hormone replacement therapy, because nitric oxide is foundational. It's not an end-all, be-all, cure-all. It's not a panacea. But any other therapeutic intervention you're going to do, especially related to hormone therapy or mobilization of stem cells, you've got to first focus on building the foundation of being able to produce nitric oxide, or else you're going to get very little clinical benefit for just focusing on, again, you mentioned it earlier, getting testosterone to a number, getting your TSH, T4, T3 to a number rather than focusing on the whole patient. And that's the problem. That's the disconnect, because the human body works in connection with everything. The knee bone's connected to the thigh bones, connected, the mouth is connected to the heart and to the gut and everything.
No, that's amazing, because I've never really heard that before. You're right. So many now they're popping up everywhere. Hormone replacement clinics, people prescribing bioidentical hormones. It's kind of the new little side package instead of Botox, because everyone's doing that. It tends to just, you're right, focus on this kind of cookbook recipe of, start here with these hormone levels, measure levels, hope symptoms are improving too, treat symptoms, treat some numbers, but nobody really, I've never heard anyone mention about the nitric oxide.
It's what allows for the cardioprotection of that, because if you look beyond the vasodilatory effects of nitric oxide, it's a signaling molecule. It does so much more. People focus on its role as a vasodilator, because that was first how it was discovered. But if you look at what nitric oxide does, irrespective of the vasodilation, it's the molecule that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. It's the molecule that activates telomerase that prevents our telomeres from shortening. And it's the molecule that leads to mitochondrial biogenesis and recouples the electron transport chain. So, and we know that longevity and really the ability to heal and repair is dependent upon mitochondrial function. It's dependent upon being able to mobilize our own stem cells and to prevent our telomeres from getting shorter, because shorter telomeres, shorter lifespan. If we can prevent telomere shortening, we can extend life and hopefully extend our health span as well. So if you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, you've got dysfunctional mitochondria, you can't mobilize your stem cells, so you can't repair and replace dysfunctional cells. We get a buildup of these senescent cells that don't do their job, and we develop chronic disease, and we get shorter telomeres. So you can't address any of these until you really address the foundation and understand nitric oxide as a signaling molecule. And if we give it or restore its production, then we basically have open communication, we have good signaling, and the human body can do what it's designed to do. And I tell people all the time that the body is much smarter than we are. Our creator is much wiser and informed than we are. So let the body do its job. We just got to get out of the way.
Yeah, I generally pick
Exactly
Jesus
true.
over Bill Gates.
All day, every day.
Okay, let's talk about, you mentioned lifestyle modifications. Jump in if we've left sort of any major thing out of there. what's the next step on the horizon? I hate to say, are there pharmaceuticals that you can take that help?
You watch what happens the second that there's a patentable pharmaceutical. Statins are going to be, they're going to be gone with bell bottoms, and it's going to be a huge push onto it's like patients come in and ask me about RSV and they're 50 years old. I said, why do you care? You never cared until there was a vaccine for RSV. It's meaningless to you. It's not going to do anything to you.
Yeah.
It's going to give you the sniffles.
So is what's going on, I guess, in the research with this? Are we going to be giving nitric oxide or things that stimulate it, other than, if people can't modify their life enough?
No, absolutely. I think the overall goal is to give people the information and knowledge they need to kind of be proactive and take control of their own health.
Yeah.
But compliance is an issue. People don't want to change their habits. We're conditioned in America and really all around the world to take a pill. So whereas we advocate lifestyle changes, there's always a need for safe and effective pharmaceuticals. So what's on the horizon for me, we've been very successful over the past 10, 15 years on developing over-the-counter nitric oxide products that actually produce this molecule. And so I have several dozen issued patents. We've commercialized this, but our whole kind of premise was, if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we got to do it for you, right? But now we're taking this technology through the FDA, and we've got a drug now in phase 3 clinical trials for ischemic heart disease. So we've got a nitric oxide releasing lozenge. You put it in your mouth. It's very similar technology as our dietary supplement. It's just a higher dose and potency that we'll do drug trials on. But we're very excited about that. I'm hoping by Q1 or Q2 of next year, we'll have this drug approved and on the market, so physicians can now have a safe and effective drug for their patients with ischemic heart disease. Because the cornerstone therapy, isosorbide or nitroglycerin, patients actually get worse over time. They develop tolerance to these drugs, and it alleviates the acute, angina or ischemic pain in these patients with ischemic heart disease. But you gotta wean patients on and off of this, then they're at risk for heart attack or stroke during their off period. So our nitric oxide releasing lozenge dilates the coronary arteries. There's no tolerance formation, and we can prolong exercise-induced angina. And at best, I think we can actually reverse disease. So we're very excited about that. We've got a drug for Alzheimer's that we're taking through the FDA for drug approval, because if you look at Alzheimer's and what causes Alzheimer's, it's focal ischemia, so lack of cerebral blood flow to certain regions of the brain. It's insulin resistance, diabetes type 3. And when you don't get blood supply in, you develop insulin resistance, the cells become dysfunctional, you get protein misfolding, and you get amyloid plaque and tau tangles. So if you give nitric oxide, you restore blood flow to the brain, you potentiate insulin signaling, you improve glucose uptake, you get the good stuff in, you take out the metabolic waste product, you activate autophagy, you clean up the cellular debris, and you address the root cause of Alzheimer's and dementia. And then we're also developing a topical drug for diabetic ulcers and non-healing wounds, which to me, that's exciting because, my dad's a paraplegic from a car accident in 1984. So, most of my adult life, I've treated his decubitus non-healing ulcers. And 4 years ago, basically 8 years ago now, he had a non-healing decubitus pressure ulcer on his right ischium that every wound care doc that I took him to said, you will not heal this wound. Dad's 65 years old. He's paraplegic for 30 years and he's diabetic. And he's not a very good patient because he doesn't, he doesn't do what I ask him to do. But we started, so I just refused to accept that. And I started making a topical nitric oxide. And remarkably, we healed that non-healing wound. 4-year non-healing, we healed it in less than a year.
Wow.
And so, today we treat wounds the same day we did 50 years ago. There's been no innovations in wound care over the past 50 years.
Well, other than hyperbaric oxygen.
Yeah, hyperbaric, negative pressure, things like that. But now we haven't seen a wound that we haven't been able to heal with our topical nitric oxide. So I'm excited about that, but we're moving forward and we're going to be a major force. And I'm not doing this for the money. I can't be bought out at this point because my objective is to get these drugs approved on the market to help patients. And it's, what we're doing is completely different than any other drug company out there. We're not using pharmacology. We're not developing a synthetic compound that we can patent that inhibits a biochemical reaction to treat a symptom. What we're doing is based on principles of restorative physiology. Understand the mechanism of disease to the extent that you can develop rational therapies. And what we found over the past 30 years is that most of these are caused by a lack of nitric oxide. So if we just give back nitric oxide and basically restore the body's ability to produce it, that's root cause effect. And so when you do that, there's no side effects because we're recapitulating physiology. We're recapitulating nature. And if we give nitric oxide back at the right dose at the right time, then there's really no clinical indication where nitric oxide would not be beneficial. So that's what I'm excited about.
No,
So
I'm also excited
I'm thinking-
about that company going public and you telling me what the name of the company. But that's another.
Well, stay
That's
tuned.
fine.
We're headed there.
Yeah, perfect. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Miss.
Oh, what was I going to say?
I derailed your train of thought with my
Yeah.
with my avaricious greed.
What about products that are on the market now? I guess I'm thinking of one that's what is it? Super Beets or something like that. I mean, these are just supplemental food things. Do they really work the same way, or is it? I don't know. Is it just foods, superfoods, like you were talking about?
Well, here's the Super Beets. I created the first Super Beet product. So Super Beets was my original product that we brought to market more than a decade ago. The problem is that company that markets, and I started that company in 2009. So I'm still a major shareholder of that company, but I left in 2015 because they were developing products that really didn't meet the rigor of the science. And so I'm involved in a lawsuit, in full disclosure with them. We've got our trial scheduled for August 12th, and I'm really looking forward to presenting our case from this, because it's what they've done is it's a disservice to the entire nitric oxide field. So to answer your question, the original products, the rich Super Beet powder worked great. It's an amazing product. The problem is they've bastardized that brand and that technology because they put the Super Beet, they got chews, gummies. They're making all these other Super Beet products that don't contain nitric oxide. They've designed around my own patent so they didn't have to pay me a royalty or pay the university a royalty on those patents. And so what it's done is created, really deception in the marketplace, because whereas the original Super Beet powder worked great, the Super Beet chews and the gummies completely destroy nitric oxide. In fact, they cause oral dysbiosis. They glycate the nitric oxide synthase enzyme. They contain seed oils. And there should be no one out there in their right mind who would take a gummy or a chew to get their vitamins. And the other thing that they failed to recognize is that the numbers don't work. You need a certain amount of beetroot to affect a nitric oxide production. But yet they're delivering beetroot in 700 milligram capsules, and just the numbers don't work. These people understand the science. They're deliberately going around this. And so, it's a complete disservice to the nitric oxide field, because I hear people all the time, they go, well, we heard you talk about nitric oxide. We think it's important, but I've been taking a nitric oxide product for the past year, and it really had no effect on me. And I go, well, what are you taking? They go, well, I take these chews or gummies that I see advertised on TV. And I go, well, of course, that's not a nitric oxide product. So it's not that nitric oxide doesn't work for you. It's the product that you're taking that's deceptively marketed as a nitric oxide product isn't delivering nitric oxide. It's not delivering on that brand promise. So, I hold these companies accountable, and, I become a target. People don't like it, but there has to be accountability and responsibility in the marketplace. And, that's why people sue me. But, I wear it as a badge of courage, because if you're doing things that are disruptive, people come after you. If you're doing things that are trivial and don't matter, people leave you alone. So bring it on.
I love it.
100% correct. Like we have learned how to get YouTube videos taken down in less than 8 hours. It's called Interview Peter McCullough. Boom. See you.
Yeah.
Talk about something that starts with V and ask questions about them, and all of a sudden you are vaporized, which is absolutely amazing. I heard one of Tucker Carlson's interviews. I can't remember if it was on Joe Rogan or whatever, but he's like, when you ask a question and the response to the question you're asking is "I hate you" or "You're stupid," then you know that you're over the target. When it's not, oh, well, let's explore this and see who has the best data. When the answer is "You're an anti-vaxxer," you're probably right.
Well, when you can't argue on facts and data, you argue. It becomes personal. People personally attack you, and that's what we're gonna fight out in the courts in the next couple of weeks. Is that the data are on my side? The truth is on my side. And so these personal attacks I'm fine with it. Yeah, it's a little bit stressful because it's cost me millions of dollars in lawyer fees to defend this. But, I cannot compromise principle. You have to stand on truth. You have to stand on data and science. And that's what we're going to argue. And, when people don't have the ability to argue based on facts and scientific discussions, it becomes personal, and hence the personal lawsuits.
Well, we follow the CDC on Instagram because we love pain, and they put something out there, and we'll gently say, well, maybe you should think about this recommendation, like nothing really crazy. They should have their medical licenses, removed.
Yeah.
And like, it's amazing. Like, people will go so far down the rabbit hole. They research you. They look up all your old posts. They look you up on Google. Like, it's for making most of the stuff we get, people agree with because I think it's rational, but it is amazing. It's like, there's people that are so invested in this sort of, I don't even, like, it's so destructive, but it's almost hilarious because it's like, that's your life? Like, really, just being pissed off and offended all the time? Like, there's way
science
more
and medicine is advanced based on discussions and some disagreements, right? If there's a consensus, there's never 100% consensus on everything. But innovation occurs when people ask questions and question the status quo. I mean, that's the only way we advance. And it's not just medicine and science, it's in any industry. You have to have some challenges and make you think a little bit differently. I give 30 or 40 lectures every year around the world, and I like the tough questions because I want people to make me think differently and think, okay, I haven't thought about that perspective. How do we consider that? I haven't thought about that. That's how innovation works. To completely suppress any type of discussion or conversation on risk benefit of certain things and principles and standard of care completely goes against the principles of science and innovation.
Yeah, but it goes wonderfully with the principles of maximum profit.
That's right. That's the driving force, and money's the root of all evil.
So how what products do you have? Because I'm very interested in this because full disclosure, I've been on PPIs for, I don't know, since they invented PPIs, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to get off this? What do we do? Like, I'm more than happy to take a nitric oxide supplement. Does NAD help? Like, is that a thing?
I mean, NADPH is a cofactor for nitric oxide production. So that's the phosphorylated form of NAD, but that's not the rate limiting step. So, if you're taking PPIs, and I know a lot of people just like you have been taking them because they need them for the reflux and the gastric discomfort. But if those completely shut down your body's ability to make nitric oxide. So in those people, really, and I'm not here to sell products, I'm here to educate and inform, but you have to take the lozenge then because that's your only source of nitric oxide. But I think if we take a step back, how do you wean off of these drugs? And as you know, you can't stop these cold turkey because you get a rebound effect and you get hypersecretion of stomach acid.
Oh yeah.
So what I tell people all the time, and even my dad, is because he was on these for years too. And so what I tell people is you have to slowly wean off of them. So whatever your dose you're taking now, and again, this isn't medical advice. I'm not a physician. I'm a PhD scientist. So just full disclosure. But whatever dose you're taking now, cut that dose in half and take that half dose for 10 days. After 10 days, take that half dose every other day. And so slowly that's going to titrate this drug, this chemical out of your body so your pyloric cells can actually start making adequate amounts of hydrochloric acid. And then you have to have stomach acid to absorb things like zinc, B vitamins, iron, calcium. So people who have been on these PPIs for many years basically are deficient in B vitamins. They're deficient in zinc. They're deficient in iron, chromium, selenium, magnesium. So I tell people just take a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar before every meal, acidify the lumen of the stomach. You can absorb nutrients. And you're going to have to take zinc and iodine because the chemical reaction in your pyloric cells to make hydrochloric acid requires zinc, requires iodine, requires B vitamins, requires sodium bicarbonate, and sodium chloride. That's the chemical reaction in the pyloric cells to make hydrochloric acid. So you've got to supplement these ingredients So allow the biochemistry to really do its job.
Huh. Interesting. I can just see Tim now in the kitchen with his concoction doing that.
Ah, screw it. Hand me the vodka.
Yeah.
That's got to work. Tell me it works. Tell me it's good for something other than just watching the news without getting pissed off.
So I know I've read different things and heard because of a couple of friends that we follow and podcasts and things going on about the iodine use. And I think I saw this I follow Dr. James DiNicolantonio. I don't know if you know him at all. It's a big physiologist in cardiovascular research. He's got a massive following on social media, especially Instagram. And he talks about similar things as you. But how does one, or what recommendations would you have if you wanted to start supplementing with iodine? Is there like a good place to go look on how to do that? Or is there a simple kind of cocktail to follow?
Best case scenario, you do an iodine tolerance test where you can dose and see at which dose you start excreting iodine in the urine. And then kind of a titration level. Everybody's different, but kind of broadly speaking, and I think what's demonstrated as a kind of a safe and kind of an optimal dose is 12.5 milligrams of iodide. So you need both iodine and the salt iodide in a supplement form. I use a product from a good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Jerry Tennant, and he makes what's called Lugol's Iodine Plus. So it's 12.5 milligrams of iodide. It contains, selenium and basically everything your body needs to make stomach acid, zinc, B vitamins. So it's not only giving you iodine for optimal thyroid function to convert T4 to T3, but it's giving your body iodine to create stomach acid to enhance your immune function and to basically allow for activation of iodine receptors on every cell in the body.
Okay, that's helpful. I know this wasn't really discussion on iodine, but how many people do you think are deficient in iodine? Because I've heard all kinds of numbers, and some say...
Well, if you look at the NHANES study, which is a government-type observation or ongoing study, it's 95% of Americans are deficient in iodine.
Whoa,
75% of Americans deficient in magnesium. Now, how much of that is due to lack of iodine in the food we eat, and how much of it is due to people using antacids, where even if they're getting iodine in their diet, they can't absorb it in the lumen of the stomach, and they just basically pooping it out.
Good point. So what about iodized salt? Is that a good thing itself to use? I mean, say you're not on PPIs, you're eating a pretty healthy diet. Can you just do that, or do you recommend most people?
I mean, you really can't eat enough. You really can't eat enough salt to get enough iodine for optimal physiology. And there's a big difference between recommended daily allowance and optimal amounts for optimal performance. So the RDA is the minimum amount you need to prevent disease. It has nothing to do with optimal physiology and giving your body what it needs for the biochemistry to occur. But it's very difficult, if not impossible, to eat enough iodized salt to get enough iodine, because there's micrograms. What we're dealing with is milligrams, 1,000 times more.
Yeah, and yes. But it's interesting because you got to look at the history of where a lot of this, RDA, recommended dietary stuff came from, and that it hasn't really been changed. I mean, it was like, we came up with this stuff so that kids didn't get rickets.
That's right.
Like seriously, and that you didn't have a thyroid goiter. Didn't walk around with this massive mass on your neck. And I mean, that's like a million miles from optimal. I mean, that's like, scurvy levels of deficiency to just not have a disease. But again, it's so funny because it gets back to this fundamental premise that somehow we can improve on nature. And, as long as you're not you don't have an obvious disease, then you're okay. Well, no, you're not. There's so much else going on in the background. So
I'm just curious, would you say, or I'm curious your thoughts on, aside from the nitric oxide being, one of the most important things in our body that we need to restore, and it sounds like we know all the PPIs prescribed and people on them.
Well, they're over the counter.
Yeah.
Well, there's 200 million prescriptions a year written for proton pump inhibitors. 200 million. That's not even counting, you can now go to your grocery store and buy Prilosec, Prevacid, OTC without a prescription. I mean, these drugs were never approved for chronic use. The FDA trials on PPIs were, I believe, at most maybe several weeks. Most of these were 3 to 5 days, maybe a week long, to prevent the symptomatic reflux. But now people are taking these for years, and now there's safety data on them. And what is it doing? 40% higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
I mean, if those long-term safety drugs studies were done today with these drugs, there's no way the FDA in their conscience could approve these drugs, because the risk far outweigh the benefit. They're worse than the COX-2 inhibitors from 20 years ago.
You assume they have a conscience.
That's true. Yeah. It's not
So I was going to say, aside from the nitric oxide, iodine, I'm going to assume you probably think that a lot of people should be maybe supplementing with magnesium, since that's a known deficiency. Any other ones to hit the top, 5 list at all that we should be aware of?
I always tell people, do micronutrient analysis, because my deficiencies, because the way I live, the food I eat, much different than anybody else's. So it's good to know what, and this is the whole concept of personalized medicine, know what you need.
Yes.
But if you look at broadly of what the data tell us, it's certainly iodine, magnesium, selenium, chromium, most of your base vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin E, just because, again, this is based on data. The food that's grown in America today, compared to the 1940s, 78% less nutrients in the same food that was grown today versus 1940s. And it's because the farming practices have changed. It's overuse of herbicides, pesticides, and it's killing the nutrients in the soil. So those are the top ones. I'm in a multivitamin without any iron in it. And then, what I take is these algae products, chlorella and spirulina, because they're binders. They help, detoxify, but they're basically packed with micronutrients.
That's a helpful place to start. And I totally agree with you. I've done the micronutrient analysis and some other testing. It's fascinating because, things I thought I would be high on or low on, it's all over the map. So it is really a kind of a wake up call. It's like, and you're right. Everything's got to be tailored specifically to the individual.
Well, I want to do that now. I want to see. And they're like, we're sorry, Dr. Heinmarsh, you're just full of shit.
You're full. Your red alert will pop up for some things. Tell us a little bit. Fix. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
You
can take everything here.
Tim's going to be packing up our U-Haul again and moving to the farm next door to you. That's what's
Come on, I got plenty room.
So can you share with us a little bit about your books, where our listeners and that want to dive deeper into all the details on this can find them, get more information?
Sure. Well, the book I have out now, I published about 5 years ago, called Functional Nitric Oxide Nutrition. You can find it on our website, n101.com, or it's on Amazon. But I've got a new book coming out that's really an updated, it's called The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing Nitric Oxide to Life. And we'll launch that book. I'll start the media tour probably in November, December. We'll do a soft launch and then full launch probably in January of 2025. But this book is part autobiographical, because it talks about kind of my history, my background, the discoveries we made, how that allowed us to commercialize and productize a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas. But it also tells about the discovery of nitric oxide, what led to the Nobel Prize, what it is, what it does. So, and it's twofold. It's to educate and inform, but really hopefully to inspire, basic scientists, even people outside of science and medicine, to, understand that everybody goes through obstacles. We encounter hurdles. If you're doing things that are disruptive, you become a target, but hopefully to inspire people to stay the course, have faith in what you're doing. And, my whole philosophy is, if you do the right thing, the cash register rings. But it's never been my intent to go out and put profit before science. And so we're going to continue to move the field forward. And this book tells that story. And, hopefully it's inspiring, but most importantly, educational, and brings awareness around nitric oxide. But, I got a YouTube channel, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, Nitric Oxide. We'll post this interview. I do lectures, podcast. What else? We've got an educational website, drnathансbryan.com. I do a monthly blog on there. And then our products can be found at n101.com. That's the letter N, the number 1, the letter O, number 1.com. And that's our That's our orally disintegrating tablet. We've got a fermented beet powder we use for pre-workout and energy. And we've developed an entire skincare line of products based on nitric oxide, improving blood flow to the skin, improving collagen deposition, hydration, mobilizing stem cells, replacing cells. Remarkable product for skincare.
I will be going there.
Oh,
I may be snorting lines of the beet powder. Actually.
Oh my gosh. So now I just had a quick, that's fascinating information. I was just thinking, the skin type stuff is the first thing I thought popped in my head is there any problems with people that say I have rosacea and using this because they already have issues with dilation? Is it can it exacerbate that or?
No, in fact, it improves it. We've got 5 published clinical trials on the serum, the topical serum from rosacea, acne, really any type of dermatitis, scar remediation, wound healing, fine lines and wrinkles. I mean, because if you look at rosacea, it's inflammation. It's a loss of regulation of blood flow, right? And so what nitric oxide does is it recruits capillaries, it dilates blood vessels, it improves collagen deposition and mitigates inflammation. And that's rosacea.
Yeah. Love it. Okay.
So how May, because May was
Tim's going to be taking a bath
like,
in it now.
you're going to have to carry this interview. I don't know anything about this. And so, which is fine. We trade off because we have, different sort of projects that and I said, this is going to be cool because I kind of dipped my toe into a little bit of this information, years ago. How blown away are you now by what we've just discussed for the last hour?
Totally. I knew the role of it, but I guess I was thinking on a, endothelial level, cardiovascular type stuff, and all these other interactions. I mean, yeah, I guess I never thought deep enough, especially on the hormonal level. I mean, I know that estrogen, testosterone affects cardiovascular health, but you're right. It's like, well, how does it actually do that? Yeah. And that's the key. But even its effects on skin and the body, this has been fascinating. So
if you want to keep track of our drug program, it's at bryantherapeutics.com. That's the drug company. The drug company acquired my consumer products company several months ago. But, that's we're excited about that. We're moving that forward. We're moving these drugs through the FDA. And, I'm 100% confident that we'll have these drugs approved and on the market. It will change the landscape of medicine and how we treat patients for the next 100 years.
That's fascinating. And I don't know. I love hearing about products that are going the right direction and aren't motivated by.
There we go.
Is that it? That's the website.
Yep.
That aren't motivated just by, it's actually not just greed and, it's another product to throw out there, but it actually works on a cellular level that fixes the problem instead of band-aiding it, which is what we do with statins and PPIs and all that.
Well, it's really disruptive. And, I've had big pharmas come after me to try to buy me out and take me out. And there's not a number, no matter how big, that would ever allow me to sell out to big pharma, because I'm not doing this for the pay, as it says in the Bible. If you do this for pay, then you're not doing it for the right reasons. There's no loyalty. So my objective and my mission is to make sure that this technology sees the light of day, that we have these products approved on the market, not only drug therapy, but to introduce nitric oxide into every major market segment around the world. And because it's the right thing to do, and I'm not doing it for the money, so there's no amount of money that anybody could offer me to buy me out.
Which is fascinating because we had this exact conversation with Sabine Hazen, who owns Microbiome out of Ventura, California. And she sees it. She's like, the microbiome of the entire world is being eaten. And she sees her research as like, this is an extinction level event. And if we want to avoid extinction, we need to know a lot about these microbes. And she's dedicated her whole life. She said she said it on a podcast, so we can disclose it. She said the first time pharma came to her, they came with about $5 million to buy her company. I think the next offer a couple of years later was $15 million, and the last one she turned down was 38. I told her, I said, I just get a counselor and take the 38, but that's just me.
And I mean, it could be 38 billion. There's no number that impresses me at this point, because it's, I'm comfortable. I've made enough money to last me the rest of my life, and so this is my legacy play, and it's again, I'm not doing it to liquidate, to cash out and go spend the rest of my life, traveling. I think this is a calling, and I feel like I have an obligation and responsibility to see this through.
Outstanding.
I love it.
I'm getting the goosies. So, well, thank you so much, Dr. Bryan. This is great. We will absolutely, if you are willing, we would love to have you back. I'd love to talk about, when your book launches, as the products get closer to launch, because this stuff is a really, like you said, it's a complete game changer. It's so disruptive, but it's good disruption. I love it.
Yep. No, thank you guys. And thanks for all you do, and really trying to advance medicine. And, the disconnect between science and medicine is really the application of new science into clinical practice. And, there's very few people who have the courage to do what's best for their patients. And, whether it's, so I appreciate what you guys do and getting this information out there. And so keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Well, that was a total surprise. I cannot believe how jacked I am on nitric oxide, at least nitric oxide information. Hopefully soon I'll be jacked on the actual chemical. And it is nitric oxide, kids, not nitrous oxide. This is not the Grateful Dead. This is a different molecule.
Good. No, actually, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think there is a lot of confusion or not even, people probably don't even know the difference. So I'm glad you brought that up. So for more information on Dr. Bryan's work, check out his website, follow him there, as well as on his YouTube channel. And we'll have links in the show's description as always. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to BS Free MD for more no-nonsense discussions like this one on health, wellness, and beyond. So please leave us a review and write to us. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next. We'd love for you to stay healthy, stay curious, and obviously keep having fun. This week's community shout out goes to
Hector Chavez.
Hector recently wrote in to us about one of the episodes he listened to with Dr. Jonathan Howard. And this episode was particularly interesting since it brought together physicians with divergent perspectives on the COVID tyranny and all the discussions around that. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, it's episode number 281. Thank you, Hector, for letting us know what you thought. We appreciate you listening and all of our listeners out there. So please hit the subscribe button, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any questions or topics, you get to write to us at doc@bsfreemd.com. We love hearing from our listeners. Thanks for tuning in, and subscribe to that truth serum as well. We'll catch you next time on BS Free MD.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.